MASH wasn't just a hit it quietly rewrote television history. Behind its record-breaking finale and iconic humor were secrets the network never wanted exposed. From Alan Alda's mysterious boots to a teddy bear worth thousands, and a shocking decision that ended it all. These 20 facts reveal the truth. And trust me, fact 20 changes everything. Fact 1. Only Alan Alda knew the finale ending. Before anything else, we have to start with a decision that almost never happens in television, especially not on a show this massive. When MASH Times prepared to film its final episode, secrecy wasn't just a precaution, it became part of the storytelling itself. Out of the entire cast, only Alan Alda was given the complete script. Not his co-stars, not longtime collaborators, just him. And that choice wasn't about control in the traditional sense, it was about protecting something far more fragile: authenticity. After 11 seasons, the producers knew audiences could sense when emotions were manufactured, so instead of rehearsing reactions, they removed certainty. Actors walked into scenes without knowing how their characters' stories would end. That uncertainty created a subtle tension that no script direction could replicate. What you see on screen, the pauses, the hesitation, the way conversations feel slightly off, comes from people processing information in real time. Alda, who also directed the finale, became the only person balancing structure with unpredictability. He understood the destination, while everyone else was still discovering the journey. That imbalance created something rare in television: genuine emotional instability. And that's why the finale didn't feel like a performance. It felt like something happening for the first time, even to the people inside it. Fact 2. A 14-year-old wrote the theme song. The theme song of MASH *, Suicide is Painless, has a tone that feels deeply intentional, haunting, detached, almost unsettling in its calmness. Most viewers assume it was written by someone with years of experience or a deep connection to war. But the truth is far stranger. The lyrics came from a 14-year-old boy, Mike Altman, the son of director Robert Altman. At the time, Robert Altman was struggling to write lyrics that matched the tone he wanted for the film. He didn't want something overly dramatic or patriotic, he wanted something that felt oddly disconnected, almost casual in its darkness. So he turned to his son, not expecting much more than a simple draft. What he got instead was exactly what he needed. The lyrics didn't try to explain anything, they drifted into dark territory with an almost careless tone. That lack of emotional weight made them more disturbing, not less. Ironically, that same quality made the song too controversial for television. The word suicide alone was enough to alarm network executives, leading to the decision to use only the instrumental version for the series. But the story doesn't end there. Mike Altman ended up earning more in royalties from the song than his father did directing the film. A teenager with no professional background created one of the most recognizable pieces of music in television history and profited from it in ways no one could have predicted. Fact 3. The writers literally ran out of names. There's a hidden problem that only long-running shows encounter, and it has nothing to do with ratings or storylines. It's something much smaller, but just as revealing: names. On MASH *, every episode introduced new wounded soldiers, new faces passing through the 4077th. At first, the writers pulled from realistic sources, military records, common American names, anything that kept the illusion grounded. But as the seasons went on, something unexpected happened. They ran out. After years of writing, the pool of believable names started to feel exhausted, and that's when improvisation took over. The writers began borrowing names from the Los Angeles Dodgers roster, slipping them into dialogue as if nothing had changed. When even that wasn't enough, they turned to personal sources, friends, family members, even former relationships. It sounds like a minor detail, but it reveals something deeper about the show's lifespan. MASH Times had extended itself far beyond the real timeline of the Korean War. The conflict lasted 3 years, but the show ran for 11. That gap forced the creative team to adapt in ways no one planned for. Yet, audiences never noticed. The illusion held because the storytelling remained strong. And that's the real takeaway: when the foundation of a show is solid, even its limitations can disappear without a trace. Fact 4. The pilot was written in just 2 days. In television, pilots are usually treated as precision work, rewritten, tested, and refined until every detail feels controlled. But MASH Times didn't begin that way. When CBS ordered the pilot, writer Larry Gelbart was given a deadline that left no room for perfection. He had just 2 days to write the entire script. By industry standards, that's almost reckless. But in this case, it became an advantage. Without time to overthink, Gelbart focused on the essentials. The humor came out sharp and immediate, not polished into something artificial. The characters weren't over-explained, they revealed themselves naturally through dialogue and behavior. And the tone, balancing comedy with emotional discomfort, emerged instinctively. What could have felt rushed instead felt honest. Gelbart was paid $25,000 for that script, but the real value wasn't financial, it was foundational. That pilot defined the identity of MASH *. It established a rhythm that the show would follow for over a decade, quick, unpredictable, and grounded in human behavior rather than formula. Sometimes, creative pressure doesn't break a story, it strips away everything unnecessary. And in this case, that pressure helped create something that felt more real than anything carefully engineered. Fact 5. There was no blood in the first episode. For a show built around a surgical unit in the middle of a war, the absence of blood seems almost impossible. But that's exactly how MASH times began. CBS executives were concerned about how audiences would react to graphic medical scenes, especially during primetime television. The network wasn't ready to push those boundaries. So the directive was clear: remove all visible blood. Surgeons performed operations, patients were treated, but everything remained visually clean. At first glance, this feels like a limitation that should have weakened the show's realism. But instead, it forced the creators to rely on something more effective: emotion. Without graphic visuals, the tension had to come from dialogue, pacing, and performance. The operating room became intense, not because of what you saw, but because of what you felt. And when later episodes introduced more realistic imagery, the impact was stronger. The audience had already connected to the stakes. The visuals didn't need to convince them, they simply reinforced what was already there. What started as a restriction ended up shaping the storytelling in a way that made it more powerful. It's a reminder that sometimes what you don't show can matter more than what you do. Fact 6. Alan Alda wore the same boots for 11 years. In most productions, costumes are replaced regularly to maintain consistency, but Alan Alda chose a different approach. For the entire run of MASH *, he wore the same pair of combat boots, not replicas, the exact same pair. Over 11 years, those boots aged with the character. They collected wear and detail that couldn't be recreated artificially. Each mark reflected time passing, not just in the story, but in the performance itself. For Alda, this wasn't about comfort, it was about continuity. Hawkeye wasn't a static character. He changed, endured, and carried emotional weight. The boots became a physical extension of that journey, and when the show ended, Alda took them home. Not as a prop, but as something personal. It's a detail most viewers don't consciously notice, but it adds to the realism of the character because authenticity often comes from small choices repeated over time. Fact 7. Radar's teddy bear sold for over $11,000. Radar O'Reilly's teddy bear might seem like a minor detail, but it became one of the most meaningful symbols in MASH *. In a setting defined by chaos and loss, the bear represented something fragile innocence that refused to disappear. Radar held on to it as a reminder of who he was before the war. Years after the show ended, that same teddy bear was sold at auction for over $11,000. Its value wasn't material. It came from what it represented. Fans saw it as more than a prop. It was a connection to a character who never fully hardened, who remained human in a place that demanded the opposite. The high price reflected emotional attachment, not rarity. People weren't buying an object, they were buying a memory, and that's why something so simple became so valuable. It carried meaning that extended far beyond the screen. Fact 8. The cast didn't know Henry Blake was being killed off. One of the most shocking moments in MASH times history came with the death of Henry Blake, but what made it unforgettable wasn't just the writing, it was how it was filmed. The cast didn't know it was happening. The script was changed at the last moment, adding the line, "There were no survivors." The actors had already played the scene as a routine farewell. Then the final line was delivered, and everything shifted. What you see on screen, the silence, the stunned reactions, is real. The actors were hearing it for the first time. The producers made that choice intentionally, knowing it would create something authentic, and it did. The moment felt less like a scene and more like an experience. It mirrored the reality of war, where loss comes without warning. That's why it still stands out today. It wasn't just written to shock, it was designed to feel true. Fact 9. The show outlasted the Korean War by 8 years. One of the most overlooked facts about MASH times is also one of the most revealing. The Korean War lasted just 3 years, from 1950 to 1953, but the show ran for 11 seasons. That means the fictional experience of the 4077th stretched nearly 4 times longer than the actual conflict. At first, that seems like a simple byproduct of success. Audiences loved the show, so it continued. But over time, something more complex happened. The show began to move away from strict historical representation and into something broader. The war stopped being a specific event and became a backdrop for exploring universal themes, loss, resilience, absurdity, and survival. Viewers weren't watching for historical accuracy anymore, they were watching for emotional truth. And that shift allowed the show to evolve without being confined to a fixed timeline. The setting remained the same, but the meaning expanded. In a way, MASH Times didn't just depict war, it redefined how television could use it as a framework. That's why it still resonates today, because it's not tied to one moment in history. It reflects a pattern that continues far beyond it. Fact 10. Alan Alda directed 32 episodes. As MASH Times progressed, Alan Alda's role expanded far beyond acting. He didn't just play Hawkeye, he helped shape the way the story was told. Over the course of the series, Alda directed 32 episodes, including some of its most emotionally complex moments. This wasn't a superficial involvement, it was the result of years spent understanding the rhythm of the show from the inside. Alda knew when humor needed to cut through tension and when silence needed to carry a scene. That kind of instinct can't be taught, it comes from living within the character for years. When he stepped into the director's chair, he brought that perspective with him. And when it came time to direct the final episode, that experience became essential. He wasn't just closing a story, he was guiding an ending that had to feel earned. His dual role created a rare kind of cohesion. The performance and the direction weren't separate, they were aligned, and that's why the tone of the show remained consistent, even as it evolved. Alda didn't just help define MASH Asterisk, he helped preserve its identity all the way to the end. Fact 11. Only one actor starred in both the movie and the show. As the series expanded, one quiet detail connected it back to its origins. Out of the entire cast, only Gary Berghoff made the transition from the 1970 film to the television series. He played Radar O'Reilly in both versions, and that continuity carried more weight than it first appears. Radar wasn't a dominant character on paper, he was soft-spoken, often in the background. But Berghoff gave him something essential, a sense of emotional grounding. In a world filled with chaos and sarcasm, Radar brought sincerity. Producers understood that replacing him would disrupt that balance. Every other role could be reimagined, but Radar required a specific kind of presence that couldn't be easily recreated. Berghoff became the bridge between two different interpretations of the same story. The film leaned into satire, while the series developed deeper emotional layers. Radar connected those tones without forcing the transition, and that's why his presence mattered so much. He didn't just carry a character forward, he carried the emotional continuity of the entire world. Fact 12. The cast voted to end the show. Most long-running television shows don't end because they choose to, they end because they have to. Ratings drop, networks intervene, or the story loses direction. But MASH Times took a different path. After 11 seasons, the cast and creators made a decision that's almost unheard of. They chose to stop. The network didn't cancel the show, the audience didn't abandon it. Instead, the people behind it recognized something important. They had told the story they set out to tell. Continuing beyond that point risked weakening what made the show meaningful in the first place. So the core cast voted, and they agreed it was time to end it. That decision reflects a level of discipline rarely seen in entertainment. It's easy to continue when something is successful. It's much harder to walk away at the right moment, but that choice is exactly what gave the finale its power. It wasn't rushed or forced, it was intentional. And because of that, the ending felt complete. The show didn't fade out, it concluded with purpose. Fact 13. The MASH finale drew 106 million viewers. When the final episode of MASH Times aired in 1983, it wasn't just a television event, it was a national moment. More than 106 million people tuned in to watch Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen. To understand that number, you have to consider the context. This wasn't an era of streaming or endless entertainment options. When something captured attention at that scale, it meant something deeper was happening. Streets emptied, conversations paused, and people gathered around their televisions together. But the significance goes beyond numbers. That viewership represented a shared emotional investment built over more than a decade. Audiences weren't just watching a show, they were saying goodbye to characters who had become part of their lives. And the finale delivered exactly what they needed. It didn't rely on spectacle or shock. It focused on closure. Each character faced their own ending, and viewers saw themselves reflected in those transitions. That's why so many people showed up, not out of curiosity, but out of connection. It wasn't just the end of a series, it was the end of something personal. Fact 14. Hawkeye appeared in every single episode. In a series defined by changed new characters, shifting dynamics, evolving tone, only one element remained constant from beginning to end. Hawkeye Pierce, played by Alan Alda. He appeared in every single episode of MASH Asterisk. That kind of consistency is rare, especially across 11 seasons. But Hawkeye wasn't just present, he was central. Through him, the audience experienced everything. The humor, the loss, the contradictions of war, it all passed through his perspective. His character allowed the show to balance extremes. When situations became too heavy, his humor created distance. When things became too absurd, his emotional depth grounded them again. Over time, Hawkeye evolved. The wit remained, but it grew sharper, more defensive. The emotional weight of his experiences began to show, and because he was always there, the audience witnessed that transformation fully. He wasn't just part of the story, he carried it. Every episode built on the last, creating a continuous emotional arc that gave the show its cohesion. Without Hawkeye, MASH times might have survived, but it wouldn't have felt the same. Fact 15. The theme song almost got banned. By the time MASH times moved from film to television, the creative team already knew the tone they wanted, quietly unsettling, emotionally complex, and just uncomfortable enough to linger. And nothing captured that better than Suicide is Painless. But for network executives in the early 1970s, that title alone was a problem. Television was still built on control over tone, over language, and most importantly, over how audiences felt. The word suicide crossed a line they weren't ready to handle in prime time, so a compromise was made. The melody would stay, but the lyrics would be removed. What audiences heard each week was the instrumental version slow, haunting, and emotionally ambiguous. And strangely, that made it even more powerful. Without words, the meaning wasn't defined, it was felt. Viewers didn't need explanation, they absorbed the mood instinctively. What began as censorship ended up shaping the identity of the show. The theme became less direct, but more universal. It didn't tell you what to think, it left you unsettled enough to figure it out yourself. Fact 16. Klinger was never supposed to stay. When Corporal Maxwell Q. Klinger first appeared, he wasn't designed to last. The idea was simple, a quick comedic moment about a soldier trying to escape the war by dressing in women's clothing. It was written as a one-time gag, something to break tension and move on, but audiences didn't move on. They responded, and more importantly, they recognized something beneath the humor. Jamie Farr didn't play Klinger as a joke. He played him as someone determined, stubborn, and quietly desperate in his own way. That difference changed everything. What was supposed to be temporary kept returning, episode after episode, until it became permanent. Over time, Klinger evolved. The dresses remained, but the character gained depth. He became part of the emotional fabric of the show, not just its humor. By the later seasons, he wasn't trying to escape anymore. He was contributing, adapting, surviving. What started as a throwaway idea became one of the most recognizable characters in the series, and it happened for one reason. The audience saw something real before the writers fully did. Fact 17. MASH was filmed in California, not Korea. Week after week, MASH times transported viewers into what felt like a war-torn Korean landscape, dusty hills, scattered tents, helicopters cutting across the sky, but none of it was Korea. The entire series was filmed in California, primarily at Malibu Creek State Park. On the surface, that's just a production detail, but it reveals something important about how the show was constructed. Filming in a controlled environment allowed the creators to shape every visual element. Lighting, terrain, camera angles, all of it could be adjusted to match the tone of each scene. They weren't chasing realism, they were building it. And over time, that constructed environment became more convincing than reality itself. Audiences accepted it completely. Those California hills became Korea in the minds of millions. The illusion didn't depend on accuracy, it depended on consistency. And that's what the show delivered. Even today, the location still exists, a quiet reminder of how effectively television can create a world that feels more real than the truth it's based on. Fact 18. Hot Lips was inspired by a real nurse. Major Margaret Hot Lips Houlihan didn't begin as the complex character audiences remember. She started as something much simpler, a strict, by-the-book figure, often used as a contrast to the more rebellious personalities around her. But her origins trace back to real-life nurses encountered by author Richard Hooker during the Korean War. That foundation gave the character a kind of authenticity, even in her earliest portrayal. Over time, though, something shifted. The writing evolved, and so did the performance. Loretta Swit brought nuance to the role, gradually reshaping Houlihan into something more layered. She became less of a stereotype and more of a person, someone balancing authority, vulnerability, and identity in a difficult environment. That transformation didn't happen suddenly. It developed across seasons, reflecting broader changes in how television approached female characters. By the end of the series, Houlihan stood as one of the most fully realized figures in the show. Her journey mirrored the show's own evolution from something initially defined by structure into something driven by depth. Fact 19. Why Trapper John suddenly disappeared. For viewers following the early seasons of MASH Asterisk, the disappearance of Trapper John McIntyre felt abrupt and unexplained. One moment, he was central to the dynamic Hawkeye's closest ally, and the next, he was gone. The reason didn't come from the story. It came from behind the scenes. Actor Wayne Rogers chose to leave the show due to creative differences. He felt his character wasn't developing in the same way as others, particularly as the narrative increasingly focused on Hawkeye. But what makes this situation unusual is how easily he was able to leave. Rogers had never signed a binding long-term contract, giving him the freedom to walk away without legal complications. That decision forced the writers to adapt quickly, reshaping the ensemble and introducing new dynamics. And while the show continued successfully, the shift was noticeable. It marked a moment where off-screen choices directly altered the structure of the story. It's a reminder that even the strongest shows depend on a fragile balance, one that can change instantly. Fact 20. Loretta Swit stayed from beginning to end. In a series where characters came and went, one presence remained constant from start to finish: Loretta Swit as Major Margaret Houlihan. Across 11 seasons, she stayed with the show, becoming one of the few actors to experience its entire evolution firsthand. That kind of continuity carries weight. It allowed her character to grow naturally, without interruption or reinterpretation. Houlihan didn't reset with each season. She changed, adapted, and matured in a way that felt authentic. Swit's commitment gave the audience something steady in a constantly shifting environment, and that consistency made the character's transformation more meaningful. By the final episode, Houlihan wasn't just a familiar face, she was a fully realized person whose journey had been lived over time. In many ways, her presence reflected what MASH Times did best. It showed that growth doesn't happen all at once. It builds gradually, shaped by experience, until one day you look back and realize how much has changed. MASH Times endures not because of its jokes, but because it revealed how humor becomes survival in the face of chaos, and how humanity can persist even in the most unlikely places. Its legacy isn't just television history, it's a reflection of resilience, truth, and emotional honesty. If these stories gave you a new perspective, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and stay with us for more untold Hollywood stories.